They watched Daniel closely during the reception, noting how often Tysha looked to him, how her posture softened, how the room's emotional temperature shifted around their exchanges. At the end of the evening, their lead negotiator smiled thinly and said, "It is fascinating how informality has entered your court." The room stiffened. Tysha replied calmly, "It was always here. We simply pretended otherwise." Daniel felt the tension spike. Humor would not help here. Silence would not either. Later, alone again in a side chamber that had become their unofficial refuge, Daniel exhaled. "That could have gone badly." "It may still," Tysha said. He hesitated, then spoke carefully. "If my presence complicates things," she raised a hand, "do not offer to remove yourself." "I wasn't," he said. "I was offering to stop talking." She looked at him then, truly looked, and for the first time since they had begun these conversations, her expression was serious without calculation. "That," she said, "would be worse." They stood in silence, watching the city ship glide through colored gas and distant stars, both aware that something fragile had formed between them, something unarmored, unplanned, and increasingly visible. Daniel made a weak attempt at levity. "For what it's worth, I still think your hair was exceptional." Tysha smiled, warmth returning. "For what it's worth," she replied, "it still is." Outside the chamber, the Empire adjusted its stance, factions whispering, probability engines straining. Inside, two people remained where they were, neither entirely comfortable, neither willing to retreat. The joke, Daniel realized, was no longer about survival. It was about consequence. The crisis did not announce itself with alarms or explosions. It arrived quietly, disguised as routine data. Daniel noticed it first, which was becoming an irritating pattern. He was standing near the rear of the strategy chamber, holding a slate that projected trade routes and diplomatic traffic like glowing veins across space, when one of the lines began to stutter. Not collapse, not reroute, just hesitate. A fraction of a second of delay, repeating at irregular intervals. Most people missed it. They were focused on the delegation's words, on tone and posture, and the careful dance of implied threats. Daniel watched the line flicker again. "That corridor is lying," he muttered. Tysha's head turned immediately. The rival delegation's lead negotiator was speaking, voice smooth, ears angled in polite confidence. He was describing cooperation, mutual benefit, shared stability. The words were perfect, too perfect. Daniel leaned closer to Tysha, keeping his voice low. "Their data stream is filtered, not falsified, filtered, like someone tidied it up before sending it." Tysha did not react outwardly, but the bioluminescent markings at her collarbone shifted, darkening slightly. Alert. She interrupted the negotiator with effortless authority. "Pause the projection." The chamber froze. The negotiator smiled, confused but compliant. "Of course, Your Majesty." Tysha gestured to Daniel. "You, explain." Every head turned. Daniel swallowed. "The corridor they're proposing relies on a stabilizer array that hasn't been serviced in a while." He checked the slate. "By which I mean it's older than 3 minor wars and has the emotional resilience of wet paper." A few people snorted before they could stop themselves. The negotiator's smile tightened. "That is an exaggeration." Daniel shrugged. "I exaggerate for clarity." Tysha stepped forward. "Show us the unfiltered data." The negotiator hesitated. That was enough. What followed was not dramatic in the traditional sense. No raised voices, no threats. Just the slow, precise dismantling of a deception, piece by piece, as Tysha guided the discussion with calm mastery. Daniel spoke only when asked, providing observations that cut through layers of obfuscation like a blade through fog. The delegation withdrew later that cycle, agreement postponed, reputations dented. The court buzzed with it afterward. Daniel had gone from anomaly to liability to asset in the space of an hour, which did nothing for his sense of equilibrium. That night, Tysha summoned him privately, not to the side chamber this time, but to the inner observatory, an ancient space at the core of the city ship, shielded from external sensors. Stars spilled across the curved viewport, unfiltered, raw. "You were right," she said without preamble. Daniel nodded. They usually are. That's what worries me. She smiled faintly. You saved us from a significant strategic embarrassment. I noticed something odd, he said. Anyone could have. No, she replied. Anyone could have analyzed. You noticed. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that no longer felt dangerous. Still heavy, but familiar. Then Tysha sighed. A real sigh, not a symbolic one. This is becoming unsustainable. Daniel winced. I was afraid you'd say that. I am not referring to you, she said. I am referring to the court's reaction to you. He relaxed slightly. Ah, good. For a moment I thought I'd have to fake my own disappearance. She glanced at him. You would be terrible at it. I know, he said. I'd leave notes. Her ears flicked, amused despite herself. Then her expression sobered again. They are watching us, she said. Not just politically, personally. Daniel leaned on the railing. I've noticed. I cannot afford the perception of favoritism, she continued, nor can I afford to lose this. She gestured vaguely between them. The admission hung there fragile. Daniel chose humor because the alternative felt too sharp. If it helps, I have no ambitions beyond not being executed and possibly improving the soup. She laughed softly, then shook her head. You make this lighter than it is. That's my survival instinct, he said. Darkness gets heavy. She turned to face him fully then. Long ears relaxed, hair unbound tonight, falling naturally over her shoulders. Without the crown, without the projections, she looked tired, human. Why do you stay? She asked quietly. Not here, with me. The question was dangerous. Daniel felt it. Answering incorrectly could shatter whatever balance they had found. Because, he said slowly, you don't need me to be impressive, just honest. The glow at her collarbone warmed, brightened. I have strategists, she said, generals, oracles, machines that predict entire futures. And none of them tell you your hair looks good, he said gently. She laughed, then stopped, emotion flickering across her face. Something unguarded. At that moment, an alert chimed softly at the edge of the chamber. A priority signal. Tysha dismissed it with a glance. Later, Daniel raised an eyebrow. That's never a good sign. Neither is delaying it, she admitted. But this can wait. They stood together, watching the stars drift, the city ship humming around them like a vast, patient animal. Outside, factions maneuvered, rumors spread, calculations were made. Inside, something simpler held. Still, Daniel felt it. The tightening of probabilities, the sense that equilibrium was straining. He cleared his throat. For what it's worth, if this all explodes, I'd like to say it's been educational. Tysha smiled, small and sincere. If it explodes, she said, it will not be because you spoke kindly. She looked out at the stars again, eyes reflective. It will be because we forgot how rare that is. The alert chimed again, more insistently this time. Consequences, Daniel thought, had finally caught up, and humor, he suspected, was about to be tested. The alert they had postponed did not wait patiently. It unfolded across the inner observatory in layers of light, a priority signal fracturing into overlapping projections that crowded the stars from view. Political trajectories, internal court sentiment, foreign response models. Each spun into existence, arguing with the others in silent urgency. The probability engines, offended by uncertainty, flashed warnings in colors Daniel had never seen before. Tysha did not flinch. She studied the data the way one studied weather, not with the hope of stopping it, but with the intention of moving through it intact. They've decided, she said calmly. Daniel squinted at the projections. Who is they today? I like to keep track. The council factions that believe informality is a contagion, she replied, and the ones who believe I have been influenced. He nodded. Ah, the dreaded I word. They are calling for clarification, she continued, publicly. Daniel grimaced. That sounds like the opposite of private. It is, Tysha agreed. They want reassurance that the throne remains untouched. He considered this, then sighed. I suppose this is where I get escorted somewhere quiet. She turned to him sharply. No! That single word carried weight, decision, finality. They expect me to distance myself, she said, to demonstrate control, to turn you into an anecdote. Daniel managed a weak smile. I'd prefer a flattering one. You will not be one, she said. Not if I have anything to say about it. They moved together toward the central hall, where the court was already assembling, tension thick enough to interfere with local gravity. The etiquette drones hovered in anxious formation, ready to document every breath. Advisors whispered. Delegates watched with the attentive interest of people hoping to witness history without being crushed by it. Tysha ascended the dais. Daniel stood where he always had, one step back, hands folded, posture correct. The difference now was that he understood why he stood there. The council spokesperson began, voice measured, respectful, sharpened to a point. He spoke of tradition, of stability, of appearances, of the necessity that power remain unambiguous. Tysha listened, patiently. When he finished, she did not immediately respond. Instead, she looked out over the hall, over the faces trained to read her as symbol rather than person. Then she spoke. You are concerned, she said, that I have been compromised by kindness. A ripple passed through the room. You are concerned that informality weakens authority, that seeing the ruler as a person erodes the throne. She paused, letting the words settle. I disagree. Daniel felt the shift before he fully understood it, the room recalibrating, expectations scrambling. For cycles uncounted, Tysha continued, this court has perfected the art of distance. We speak in strategy, we praise in abstractions, we avoid the dangerous territory of sincerity. Her long ears angled forward, attentive, resolute. And yet, she said, in all that calculation, we have overlooked something essential. She gestured, not toward Daniel as an individual, but toward the space he occupied. This attendant spoke without armor. He did not flatter my power. He did not seek advantage. He acknowledged effort, humanity. A murmur spread, uncertain but undeniable. If that unsettles you, Tysha said evenly, consider why. Silence followed. Not shocked silence this time. Thoughtful. The council spokesperson opened his mouth, then closed it again, recalculating. Daniel realized his heart had stopped racing. He was calm. Whatever happened now, he had already crossed the point of no return and survived, Tysha concluded simply. The throne remains untouched, but it is no longer unreachable. No one moved. Then slowly the room breathed. The council withdrew its request for clarification, not because it had been defeated, but because it had been rendered irrelevant. Later, much later, when the hall had emptied and the city ship settled into its steady drift, Daniel stood once more in the observatory with Tysha. The stars were back, unfiltered and distant. You changed things, he said quietly. She shook her head. You did. I talked about hair, he reminded her. And effort, she replied. And presence. He smiled softer now. I suppose I noticed something important. You always did, she said. There was no grand reward, no sudden elevation. Daniel returned to his duties, still holding things, still trying not to break history. The difference was that history now occasionally nodded back. The court did not become casual overnight, but it became less afraid. Conversations shifted. Compliments, when they came, were fewer, but real. As for Tysha, she ruled as she always had, with intelligence, strength, and vision. The difference lay in the quiet moments, in the unguarded pauses, in the knowledge that she could be seen without being diminished. Daniel remained where he was meant to be, not invisible, not central, present. And sometimes when the hall was quiet and the universe felt especially vast, Queen Tysha wore her hair a little differently, braided not for tradition or power, but simply because she liked the way it made her feel. And someone, somewhere nearby, noticed. The reception hall was designed to intimidate before a single word was spoken. Its ceiling rose far beyond practical engineering limits, held aloft by gravity anchors that hummed faintly, as if the room itself were thinking very hard about not collapsing. Light flowed instead of shining, bending softly around crystalline pillars etched with the history of conquest that nobody dared read aloud. Daniel stood near one of those pillars, hands folded, posture trained into him through years of corrective reminders, and one memorable electric shock. Watching the court assemble with the cautious patience of someone who had learned that curiosity was safest when kept internal. Queen Tysha entered without announcement. She did not need one. The room knew. The air subtly shifted, pressure recalibrated, and every conversation died as if cut by the same invisible blade. She looked at first glance like a human woman, which only made people more uneasy. Her long ears, elegant and unmistakably alien, swept back through her hair, marking her heritage more clearly than any crown could. That hair was braided with mathematical precision, layer upon layer woven into a pattern Daniel recognized from archived cultural files. A design associated with resolve, renewal, and, according to one poorly translated footnote, stubborn optimism. Daniel noticed this because noticing was his only real talent. He noticed the things no one else mentioned because they were too busy noticing power. The braid alone must have taken hours. He imagined the stylists negotiating with her patients like diplomats, offering compromises strand by strand. It was an oddly comforting thought. The court began its ritualized admiration. Delegates praised her military foresight, her economic expansions, her mastery of predictive war engines that could simulate rebellions before breakfast. Daniel listened with half an ear, wondering whether anyone else could hear the faint clicking sound of the etiquette compliance drones hovering above them, recording tone, posture, and breathing irregularities. One of them drifted a little too close to his head. He smiled politely at it, which was probably unnecessary, but he had learned long ago that machines responded well to confidence, even false confidence. Tysha stood motionless through it all, her expression carefully neutral, eyes forward. Daniel thought she looked bored, not dangerously bored, just the quiet fatigue of someone being described rather than spoken to. When a particularly long-winded ambassador finished praising her unyielding authority, Daniel saw her fingers twitch, just once, near the edge of her sleeve. It was nothing. It was everything. The silence that followed the final speech was meant to be reverent. It stretched. It thickened. Daniel felt it pressing on his chest, the way artificial gravity sometimes did when miscalibrated. Without fully understanding how the thought traveled from his brain to his mouth, he spoke. "Your hair is very beautiful." The words floated out, unarmored, utterly defenseless. The hall stopped existing for a moment. Even the gravity anchors seemed to hesitate. Somewhere, an etiquette drone made a distressed chirping sound and immediately shut itself off, possibly out of shame. Daniel became intensely aware of his heartbeat, which had chosen this moment to experiment with speed. He had not meant it strategically. He had not meant it at all, really. It was simply true. Queen Tysha turned her head, slowly. Her long ears shifted with the motion, catching the light. For a terrible second, Daniel imagined all the possible outcomes: public reprimand, quiet removal, ceremonial vaporization. He wondered with detached curiosity whether his personnel file would be archived under educational failure or cautionary tale. Then she smiled. Not the small, calculated smile reserved for treaties, but something genuine, surprised and unmistakably human. "Thank you," she said. "It took longer than the invasion of Caris Minor." A few people laughed, unsure whether they were allowed to. Daniel laughed because stopping himself seemed more dangerous. The silence didn't return the same way. It fractured, reformed, became uncertain. Tysha looked at Daniel as if seeing him properly for the first time, not as a function, but as a presence. "You are?" "Daniel," he said, voice steady now, emboldened by the fact that he was still standing. "Court attendant. Mostly I hold things and try not to break history." "An important role," she replied. "History is fragile." Around them, the hall slowly resumed breathing. Nothing was the same, though no one could yet say why. Daniel felt it, a subtle shift, like a probability field adjusting its expectations. He had spoken out of turn, out of protocol, out of sense, and somehow, impossibly, the universe had not punished him for it. Yet, the hall did not immediately recover from the idea that the Queen had laughed. It tried, certainly. The gravity anchors resumed their confident hum, the etiquette drones rebooted with embarrassed clicks, and the delegates remembered how to blink. But the atmosphere had shifted, as if someone had adjusted the room's emotional settings and forgotten to lock the panel. Daniel became painfully aware of his position in space. He was still standing where he had always stood, near the third crystalline pillar from the east wall. Yet it felt as though the floor beneath him had been promoted without his consent. Several courtiers glanced at him the way one might look at an unexploded device, fascinated, cautious, quietly resentful that it hadn't gone off yet. Queen Tysha did not return to her original posture. That alone caused a ripple of unease. She turned slightly toward Daniel, weight settling on one hip in a way no protocol manual had ever approved. Her long ears relaxed from their formal angle, an intimate gesture in her culture, though only a handful of scholars present were aware of it. One of them promptly fainted. "You notice things," Tysha said, not accusingly, but with interest. Daniel considered several possible responses, all of which involved apologizing himself into a smaller shape. Instead, he shrugged, a movement that felt rebellious despite its ordinariness. "I'm very good at noticing things that will eventually get me into trouble." A few suppressed snorts escaped the crowd. Someone coughed loudly to disguise laughter. Tisha's smile widened just enough to suggest she approved of the attempt. "Most people here notice only what they are supposed to," she replied. "You noticed what was there." She gestured and the reception hall responded, lights dimming slightly, the ambient noise dropping to a polite murmur. This was not standard procedure. Daniel knew because standard procedure had been drilled into him with near religious fervor. This was improvisation, and improvisation in the imperial court was generally considered a gateway behavior. "What is your function today, Daniel who notices?" Tysha asked. He blinked. "Currently? I was assigned to ensure that no one leaned on the historical timeline display. Yesterday someone did, and it briefly suggested that the empire was founded by a bakery." A pause. Then Tysha laughed again, sharper this time. "I like that version better." The tension tried to reassert itself, failed, and retreated to a corner to sulk. Advisors exchanged frantic glances, their neural implants no doubt overheating as they attempted to predict where this was going. One of them discreetly activated a probability engine, only to shut it down again when it returned a warning about insufficient precedent. Tysha stepped closer to Daniel. Not close enough to be threatening, but close enough that he could see the faint shimmer of bioluminescent markings along her collarbone, a subtle psi-biological enhancement that responded to emotional states. They glowed softly now, a calm blue-green, contentment if the archives were accurate. "You complimented my hair," she said. "Not my conquests, not my governance, my hair." "Yes," Daniel said. "In my defense, the conquests seemed busy." She tilted her head, long ears angling forward. "Do you know why I wore this style today?" He hesitated. Guessing incorrectly felt dangerous. Guessing at all felt dangerous. "No, Your Majesty." "Because it makes me feel assembled," she said after a moment, "as though all the parts of me are where they should be." "No one ever mentions that. They mention what I do, never how I arrive to do it." Daniel nodded slowly. "People often skip the arrival. It's inconvenient." That earned him another look, thoughtful this time. The glow at her collarbone brightened a fraction. The court watched, transfixed, as their ruler continued to speak with a man whose greatest recorded achievement was not dropping a ceremonial data slate during a planetary merger. Some of them looked scandalized. Others looked envious. One looked as though he were reconsidering every compliment he had ever rehearsed. "What else do you notice?" Tysha asked. Daniel glanced around, choosing his words carefully, then less carefully. "That everyone here is holding their breath, including the room." As if on cue, a ventilation panel exhaled with a startled hiss. Tysha closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, amused. "You may be right. Breathe," she said, and astonishingly, people obeyed. The reception resumed, but it did not return to what it had been. Conversation shifted, cautious but curious. Daniel felt something settle into place, an invisible designation hovering around him, like a newly assigned title he did not want and could not refuse. He had spoken without armor, and the universe had leaned in to listen. From her place at the center of it all, Queen Tysha watched him with open interest, and for the first time in many years, she felt seen not as a calculation, but as a person who had spent 4 hours in a chair, having her hair braided, because it mattered to her. And that, she suspected, was far more dangerous than any insult. After the reception dissolved into something that resembled normal movement rather than ceremonial paralysis, Daniel expected to be quietly escorted out of existence. This was not paranoia, it was experience. Unscheduled interactions with the Queen tended to end with paperwork at best and disappearances at worst. Instead, a small, hovering sphere the color of cautious optimism drifted toward him and projected a polite symbol requesting his attention. "Daniel," it chimed, voice carefully neutral. "You are requested to remain available." Remain available was court language for, "We don't know what to do with you yet." "Yes," Daniel said, because declining availability in the imperial court was usually permanent. The sphere guided him, not escorted. It was important to note that difference, at least to his rapidly spiraling sense of dignity, through a series of corridors that adjusted their lighting based on the emotional stability of the occupants. The lights flickered uncertainly around Daniel, apparently unable to settle on a reading. He took that as fair. They stopped outside a smaller chamber adjoining the main hall, a space used for strategic recalibration, private arguments, and occasionally yelling at holograms. The door opened before the sphere could announce him. Queen Tysha was alone. Well, mostly alone. Several semi-transparent data projections hovered around her, slowly rotating, battle maps, economic flowcharts, a paused simulation of a moon exploding politely. She dismissed them with a flick of her hand when she saw Daniel, the images collapsing into sparks of light that faded into the air. "You look like a man expecting to be disintegrated," she observed. "I like to manage my expectations," Daniel replied. "Keeps disappointment to a minimum." That earned him a soft sound from her that might have been a laugh or might have been an alien equivalent involving internal resonance. Her long ears angled outward, relaxed. The bioluminescent markings at her collarbone glowed faintly again, a color Daniel privately labeled relieved teal. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a chair that adjusted itself the moment he approached, scanning his posture and deciding he needed more lumbar support than pride would allow. He sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence here was different from the hall silence. It wasn't weaponized. It was curious. "Do you know," Tysha said at last, "how many people have spoken to me today?" Daniel considered. "Out loud or internally while panicking?" "Out loud." "Hundreds," he guessed. "Exactly 312, she said. "And you are the only one who said something that was not about what I represent." Daniel shifted in the chair, which responded by becoming firmer, as if offended. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disrupt." "I am not," she interrupted. "Disrupted is good. Disrupted means something moved." She studied him now with the intensity she usually reserved for tactical projections. Daniel felt strangely exposed, as though she could see his personnel file hovering above his head, complete with the note, "Adequate, not exceptional." "Why did you say it?" she asked. He answered honestly because that seemed to be the theme he had accidentally committed to. "Because it was there, and because it looked like no one else was going to." Tysha nodded slowly. "My hair is never there to them. It is decoration, or symbolism, or a cultural footnote. Never effort." Daniel smiled, a small, sympathetic thing. "Effort deserves acknowledgement. Otherwise it gets tired and stops showing up." She regarded him for a long moment, then turned away, pacing toward the tall viewport that overlooked the city ship below. A vast, drifting metropolis wrapped around a mobile planetary core. Traffic streamed through controlled gravity lanes, ships blinking in and out of phase like impatient thoughts. "When I was younger," Tysha said, "I believed power would make things simpler, that once I reached the center, everything would align." "And did it?" Daniel asked. She snorted, an actual snort. "Nothing has ever been less aligned." That broke something loose between them. The conversation loosened, uncoiling into something almost normal. She asked him how long he had served. He told her. She asked why he stayed. He said the cafeteria had excellent soup, and leaving seemed like a lot of paperwork. She told him her favorite strategist once tried to overthrow her using a time loop and got stuck repeating the same speech for 6 weeks. Daniel said that sounded exhausting. They laughed. Both of them. Outside the chamber, unnoticed but very alarmed, several monitoring systems flagged the interaction as statistically impossible. Inside, none of that mattered. When the conversation finally slowed, Tysha looked at him thoughtfully. "You are dangerous, Daniel." "I get that a lot," he said. "Usually from furniture." She smiled again. "You are dangerous because you see the person and not the position, and because you speak without armor." Daniel swallowed. "I can try armor if you prefer. I'm very bad at it, though." "No," she said softly. "Do not change." The glow at her collarbone brightened, warm now. Outside, the city ship adjusted its orbit by a fraction, responding to calculations that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with balance. Daniel left the chamber later with his existence intact and his life irrevocably altered, though he did not yet know how. Behind him, Queen Tysha stood alone again, staring out at the stars, feeling something unfamiliar settle into place. Not strategy, not power, something human. By the next cycle, the court had developed a theory problem. Daniel was the problem. He became aware of this gradually, the way one notices a mild fever by the sudden interest of thermometers. Conversations paused when he entered rooms. Advisors smiled too quickly. Security drones recalibrated their paths to pass just a little closer to him than necessary, as if proximity might reveal what he was. His assignment did not change. That was in itself suspicious. He continued to hold things, deliver messages, and ensure no one leaned on objects of historical importance. But now occasionally a request would arrive, politely phrased, formally unsigned, asking for his presence near the Queen during proceedings that were, until recently, far above his clearance level. Queen Tysha did not explain this. She simply included him. The first time it happened, Daniel stood at her side during a strategic briefing involving a trade corridor that kept collapsing into subspace every third shipment. Generals argued. Economists projected catastrophic spirals. A physicist insisted the corridor was moody. Daniel listened, hands folded, nodding at appropriate intervals, trying not to breathe too loudly. At some point, Tysha leaned slightly toward him. "What do you notice?" she asked quietly. Daniel glanced at the projections. The corridor flickered, unstable. "It looks tired," he said, "like it's being forced to behave in a way it no longer wants to." The room froze. The physicist stared. "That is oddly accurate." Tysha raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Daniel hesitated. "I mean, if you keep forcing a system to perform without accounting for its limits, eventually it resists, or collapses, or starts swallowing cargo vessels out of spite." The corridor stabilized 2 days later after minor adjustments inspired by that comment. No one credited Daniel. Several people resented him anyway. Between such moments, Tysha continued to speak with him as if this were normal. She asked about his observations of court life, and he provided them with the careful honesty of someone who knew candor could be fatal. "Everyone is very impressive," he said once, "and very afraid of being unimpressive." She smiled at that, long ears tilting back thoughtfully. "You are not afraid." "Oh, I am," Daniel said. "Just not of the same things." Their conversations acquired a rhythm, brief exchanges during formal events, longer ones during walks along the observation decks, where the city ship's internal gravity fluctuated slightly, encouraging slow movement and reflection. They talked about governance, about alien psychology, about the odd loneliness of being surrounded by people who only saw your function. Tysha admitted one evening that she sometimes missed being underestimated. Daniel laughed. "It's very freeing. People expect nothing, so every success feels like a delightful administrative error." Humor became their pressure valve. When advisors presented grim projections, Daniel would murmur, "On the bright side, at least it's not exploding yet." When Tysha's neural crown malfunctioned and began translating compliments into threats, Daniel suggested keeping it that way, for efficiency. Word spread. Poorly. Courtiers began attempting authenticity. It was painful. One noble complimented Tysha's existential presence. Another remarked on her strategically pleasing posture. Someone tried to praise her hair and managed to imply conquest by follicle. Tysha endured it with grace, but Daniel could see the glow at her collarbone dim slightly with each calculated attempt. After one such encounter, she sighed. They think honesty is a tactic now? Daniel grimaced. It loses its charm when weaponized. Do you think they can learn? She asked. Possibly, he said, but only if they stop trying to win. That night, an advisory council convened without Daniel's knowledge. His name appeared in several projections alongside words like anomaly, influence, and risk. No consensus formed. The probability engines refused to cooperate, returning only blank fields labeled undefined. Meanwhile, Daniel found himself summoned again, this time to a private chamber where Tysha stood without her crown, hair unbraided and loose, long ears visible and unguarded. The sight startled him, not because it was intimate, but because it was unarmored. You look surprised, she said. I'm recalibrating, he replied. This is less intimidating. She smiled. Good. They spoke then of smaller things, of sleep, of how leadership left little room for rest. Daniel joked about instituting mandatory naps. Tysha considered it seriously. Outside, the Empire continued its vast, careful motion through space, unaware that its center had shifted slightly, not through conquest or calculation, but through conversation. And Daniel, still holding things and trying not to break history, realized that the most dangerous place he had ever stood was exactly where he was now. By the fifth cycle after the compliment incident, which had become an incident in the way small sparks sometimes become official calendar references, the court entered what historians would later describe as a period of interpretive panic. Daniel felt it most acutely in the way people stopped speaking when he approached, then resumed with exaggerated casualness, as if volume alone could disguise intent. He was offered seats he had not earned, drinks he had not requested, and advice he had not survived long enough to trust. One senior aide attempted to befriend him by explaining at length how unpredictable Queen Tysha was, which Daniel found impressive given that the aide had never been alone in a room with her. Tysha, for her part, behaved as though nothing unusual was happening, which was deeply unsettling to everyone else. She continued to ask Daniel questions during councils, continued to walk with him along the observation rings, continued to listen when he spoke, which had become the real problem. Influence, after all, was meant to be deliberate, measurable, and ideally documented. Daniel's influence was none of these things. It happened sideways. A group of junior courtiers attempted to imitate his manner. They failed loudly. One tried honesty by confessing he had once dreamed of being a poet. Tysha congratulated him and suggested he submit his work to the Imperial Archives. He fainted. Another attempted humor during a war briefing, joking about the projected casualty numbers. Tysha stared at him until he apologized to mathematics. Daniel watched these efforts with growing discomfort. They're trying too hard, he muttered during one session. Tysha nodded. They think you unlocked a door. Did I? He asked. No, she said. You forgot the door was there. That distinction mattered more than anyone realized. The situation escalated when a mid-level strategist formally proposed creating a new advisory role, human context interpreter. Daniel's name appeared beneath it in glowing script. The proposal was rejected within minutes, then quietly archived, then somehow leaked. Daniel found out when 3 different people congratulated him on a promotion that did not exist. I didn't apply for anything, he told Tysha later, mildly horrified. I know, she said. That is why they are confused. The humor for Daniel began to wear thin. Being unnoticed had been safe. Being noticed felt like standing under a malfunctioning shield generator. He joked less, observed more. He noticed that advisors watched Tysha when she spoke to him, noting posture, tone, frequency. He noticed that her bioluminescent markings responded differently around him, and that this fact unsettled people who had built careers on predicting her reactions. One evening, as the city ship passed through a nebula that painted the viewport in slow-moving color, Daniel voiced what had been circling him for days. They're turning this into something strategic, he said, and it's going to ruin it. Tysha leaned against the railing, long ears angled back, thoughtful. Everything here becomes strategic eventually. That doesn't mean it should, he replied. Some things only work if they aren't used. She studied him, expression unreadable. Are you saying you regret speaking? Daniel considered. No. I regret that it's being translated. That made her laugh softly. You are still dangerous, she said. Yes, he agreed. And now they've noticed. The consequences arrived sooner than expected. A delegation from a rival system arrived, sharp-eyed and meticulously briefed. They had heard rumors.